I do have a picture of the United States of America up here. The next subject for our discussion is the degree to which global warming in particular is providing a forum to break down disciplinary barriers and create perhaps new models of interdisciplinary dialogue and discussion and perhaps learning over the long run. And the context for this is the National Teach-In on Global Warming Solutions, which my colleague Chung-In Chung and I co-directed over the last 3 years. I want to give just a little bit of background on that, and then we've invited two of the leaders who were involved in the National Teach-In, Penelope Cannan from the University of Central Florida, and Pushpa Ramakrishna, right, I'm sorry, from Chandler Gilbert Community College, who were regional leaders in the sustainability movement, but also were involved in the National Teach-In. So a little background on the Teach-In. And it really goes back to 1999 when I made a sort of a conscious transition in my professional life to step back a little bit from my work as an academic researcher who had been engaged in the climate debates and in particular focusing on jobs and competitiveness issues around the Kyoto Treaty time, to take on a bigger role as a public educator. The initial story was that when the Kyoto Treaty was passed in 97 or 98, and this again reflects my own transition in thinking the way from management to leadership, I guess, that I talked about yesterday. I was sort of still under the naive impression that we were actually going to deal with this problem in the way that we had dealt with all other environmental problems. That, you know, the standard process seemed to be happening. You know, there were people who we became slowly aware of the problem. We appeared to have champions in Congress. We signed the Kyoto Treaty. It was time for the president to come home and get some enabling legislation. But then, again, sort of the business as usual scenario in the past began to fail us. And suddenly we had what clearly is the biggest, not environmental, but civilizational challenge that humans have ever faced. And we just were ignoring it. And I actually attended a symposium session, very much like this one at Lewis and Clark College that was organized by my colleague in 98, or I believe it was. And we had invited 4 scientists who came to talk about what, you know, global warming was real and serious and we needed to do something about it. And then for balance, we invited a gentleman from the Competitiveness Policy Institute, a lawyer, who gave a very persuasive and convincing argument that, well, A, global warming wasn't happening, and B, even if it wasn't happening, and we tried to do something about it, it would wreck the economy and, you know, create 4 million job losses, and C, it was going to be good for us. And this was just an eye-opener for me because what I realized was that, you know, this sort of managerial vision that I had was incorrect because it really left out the politics, and that the politics in this country were simply insufficient to generate the kind of political response that we needed to this problem. And so I started a nonprofit organization called the Greenhouse Network. We did a lot of speaker trainings and weekend workshops for people who wanted to be engaged in their communities around the world, around the country. And then in 2006, as I mentioned yesterday, Jim Hanson's interview in The Independent and sort of my own reading of the science all kind of came crashing down on me, and I became aware, as many others have, that we really are in a decade of decision, and what we do in the next few years is going to be critical for the future. And so I was searching for a way to ramp up my own level of involvement. And at that time, I mean, and this is really the motivating factor for the work that we've been doing with the National Teach-In, is the recognition that this realization wasn't just happening for me, but that it was happening all across, had to be happening all across the country. So I knew that at every college and university and community college and high school and elementary school in the country, there were 2 or 3 or 4 faculty and staff members who also understood, had been thinking about these issues for 15 or 20 years, and was also coming to this realization that business as usual at the academy wasn't going to work, and that we needed to get more involved, and we're looking for leadership opportunities. So with Chung In and some other colleagues from Portland, we conceived the idea of a national teach-in, and that was in September of 2006. We launched our website. We had an 18-month lead time. I took 2 years off from teaching to run the project. January 31st, 2008 was our first teach-in. It was called Focus a Nation. It involved ultimately about 1,900 schools and close to 1 million people in dialogue. We left Focus a Nation, split off from that organization, started a new group to run a second teach-in this year that was focused on solutions for the first 100 days. And that was in February, and slightly smaller, about 800 schools were involved, about 250,000 people. And what I want to, tomorrow morning we want to talk about to what extent is that network of faculty and staff still engaged and want to be engaged, and how do we re-engage them, probably not with a teach-in, but with something else this year. But this morning we want to think about to what extent did those teaching experiences allow for and begin to create cross-disciplinary engagement? Because as environmental educators, I know that sort of the holy grail of the work we've been doing is how do we get sustainability across the curriculum? You know, we've been talking about that for many, many years. And a lot of good work. I know there's a number of people in the audience who are doing this kind of stuff. What we decided to do was to sort of try and create a conversation not about sustainability, but around this very topical issue. The map here kind of gives you an idea of the level of engagement and participation. So if we go to, whoops, I got to enter the state here. Well, I won't spend the time doing this, but if you go to the map and you click on Bard College, you'll find that Lori Husted, are you here this morning, Lori? Yeah, back there. Did a wonderful job here at Bard both years, but this last year organized a big playing of the wedge game from the Socolow and Pacala wedge game from Princeton, and it was, I think, a very successful educational opportunity, bringing people together from all across the college, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that later.